The thermal bloom hit the planetary shield array with the force of a kinetic impact weapon, shattering the primary grid in a cascade of sparking titanium and ozone. While the rest of the settlement plunged into immediate, chaotic darkness, Jaxon stood in the center of the engineering bay, his hand hovering over the manual override. He did not feel fear. He felt the humming vibration of the floor plates, a deep rhythmic thrum that resonated through his boots and settled in his chest like a second heartbeat. This was the moment the sensors had promised, the singularity of chaos where human ingenuity either folded or defied the gods themselves. But truthfully, before the legend began, Jaxon was just the eccentric engineer the local Galactic Council observers politely ignored. 6 months prior, the settlement was a picture of complacent efficiency. The terraforming stabilizers were running at optimal capacity, and the weather patterns were filed under predictable variances. Yet Jaxon saw the subtle flickering in the atmospheric data, the way the tectonic plates hummed a fraction of a note too low. He spent his credits salvaging what looked like junk to the untrained eye, but was actually repurposed Precursor Tech, hardened alloys capable of withstanding the heat of a star. He spent his days welding massive geothermal couplers in the sector designated for waste management. The neighbors called it an eyesore. The council representatives called it a misuse of municipal resources, laughing off his warnings as the paranoia of a species that had spent too long fighting gravity. They did not understand the Terran Spirit. They did not understand that for a human, peace is just the intermission between challenges. Jaxon wasn't building a bunker, he was building an engine. He ignored their scoffs, focusing instead on the satisfying snap of magnetic locks and the clean blue flare of his plasma torch. Then came the shift. It wasn't a gradual decline, but a sudden, violent upheaval. The atmospheric stabilizers didn't just fail, they disintegrated under the pressure of a sudden, hyper-dense cyclonic front that descended like an apex predator claiming its territory. The sky turned a violent, bruising purple, and the ambient temperature plummeted at a rate that froze hydraulic fluid in the lines. The main reactor whined, a high-pitched scream of mechanical agony before cutting out completely. The silence that followed should have been terrifying. Instead, it was shattered by the roar of Jaxon's creation coming to life. Down in the waste sector, the backup turbines spun up to Mach speed within seconds. The vibration wasn't a shudder of collapse, but a roar of defiance. Jaxon slammed the primary lever forward. A surge of geothermal power, hot and limitless, flooded the independent conduits he had laid in secret. Floodlights erupted into life, cutting through the encroaching frost with beams of pure, blinding white. The heat from the vents washed over the bay, turning the freezing air into a swirl of energy and steam. This wasn't just a backup generator. It was a fortress of light in a world gone dark. The comms unit crackled to life, not with screams, but with the sharp, static-laced demands of a mobilization already in progress. Jaxon didn't treat the settlement like a group of refugees, he treated them like a crew. His voice cut through the localized interference with the authority of a fleet admiral. He projected the thermal schematics onto the main view screen, a glowing map of safe zones pulsing against the encroaching storm. The geothermal vents he had welded were doing more than generating power. They were creating a thermal bloom, a protective bubble of rising heat that pushed the supercooled atmosphere back. It was a corridor of defiance carved straight through the ice. Jaxon keyed the mic, his fingers dancing across the console. Sector 4, mobilize. You have a 90-second window before the wind shear rotates. Move. The response was immediate. Down in the transport bay, hover sleds and cargo haulers roared into action. The engines sang a high-pitched aria of combustion and anti-grav thrust. This wasn't a desperate flight, it was a synchronized drift, a kinetic ballet of steel and purpose. Drivers pushed their throttles to the limit, the vehicles tearing across the frozen ground with such speed that the sonic displacement shattered the falling ice crystals into glittering dust. Jaxon watched the telemetry. The storm was an apex predator, hunting for a weakness, slamming against his makeshift shield with kinetic impact force. But the Precursor Tech held. The alloys groaned, vibrating with a pitch that rattled Jaxon's teeth, but they did not buckle.
He diverted power from the stabilizers to the forward heat arrays, creating a lance of pure energy that punched a hole through the densest part of the cyclone. Through the viewing ports, the evacuees saw the destination, the independent structure, glowing like a supernova against the violet sky. It was a beacon of human ingenuity. As the last convoy breached the threshold, the massive blast doors slammed shut, sealing them in a cocoon of warmth and light. The roar of the storm was instantly replaced by the heavy, reassuring thrum of the ventilation systems, pumping heated, oxygen-rich air. Inside, the relief was electric. It wasn't just survival, it was victory. An unbreakable bond formed in that engineering bay, a shared understanding that passed between the council observers and the settlers. They looked at the humming machinery, then at Jaxon, realizing that the chaotic mess of wires and salvaged metal was the most advanced thing on the planet. When the storm finally broke 2 days later, the sun revealed a landscape scoured clean, but the structure stood untouched. The council attempted to organize a ceremony, drafting speeches about foresight and bravery. They wanted to pin a medal on Jaxon's chest to categorize his actions within their standard heroic protocols. But when the delegation arrived at the engineering bay, the room was empty of pomp. Jaxon was already under the main console, stripped to his undershirt, wrestling with a new set of recalcitrant hydraulics. He didn't even look up as the council leader cleared his throat. Jaxon simply pointed a grease-stained finger on a new set of readings on the monitor, a slight variance in the tectonic resonance, invisible to anyone else. He wasn't interested in the past victory, he was already solving the next problem. The FTL drive of human progress never idled, it only accelerated. The cosmic architect closes the file. The legend remains. And that is how humanity survives, not just with muscles, but with the mind. Let's break down the tactical reality of what we just saw, because Jaxon isn't just a character, he's a mindset. Number 1, the Cassandra reality. We've all been there. You see a problem coming, you warn the people in charge, and they call you paranoid. They called Jaxon's work waste management right until it became their only lifeline. The lesson here is vindication doesn't need an applause track. Sometimes being right is a lonely job, but it's the job that keeps the lights on. Number 2, preparation versus consensus. The council relied on consensus reality, the idea that because everyone says it's safe, it is safe. Jaxon lived in objective reality, physics, thermodynamics, and Murphy's Law. In a survival scenario, consensus is lethal. Engineering is the only truth. And finally, fear is data. Jaxon felt the vibrations, he saw the flicker. He didn't let fear freeze him, he used it as intelligence. He didn't build a bunker to hide in, he built an engine to fight back. That is the Terran Spirit. We don't just survive the storm, we engineer a way to stare it down. If you're the kind of person who checks the exits when you walk into a room or keeps a backup plan for your backup plan, then you're already part of the crew. If this story revved your engines, smash that like button like it's a manual override. Subscribe to join the fleet and tell me in the comments, if the grid goes down tomorrow, what is the one tool you're grabbing first?